Since the year 1789, the United States has overseen a vast amount of territories around the world. These regions, although ruled by a parent government, have not been granted statehood. Historically, of the current 50 states, 31 were at one time or another part of an organized and incorporated U.S. territory. Located at the extreme northwest of the North American continent, the state of Alaska is among the more interesting of these. Covering an area of just over 1.7 million square kilometers, Alaska is by far the largest state in the U.S. and the 7th largest subnational division in the world. The history of Alaska as part of the United States began in 1867. However, settlement in the region dates as far back as 12,000 BC, during the last glacial period, a time commonly referred to as the Ice Age. During this period, much of the water in the oceans evaporated and settled on the continents in the form of ice sheets and glaciers. This shift in the global water cycle led to a massive drop in sea levels and the emergence of land connections in various regions around the globe. The Bering Land Bridge, which extended from what is now western Alaska to northeastern Siberia, was one of the areas on Earth that became exposed. This land bridge had an hourglass-shaped landscape that covered approximately 1.6 million square kilometers, an area twice the area of the state of Texas. At its greatest extent, the Bering Land Bridge was up to 1,000 kilometers wide from north to south. Many historians believe this land bridge allowed the passage of many species of plants and animals between the two continents. Indigenous people also crossed into the western part of Alaska to follow the herds of animals they hunted, and as time went on, many of them began to settle in the area. The descendants of these indigenous people are known as Native Alaskans and constitute almost 20% of the population of Alaska today. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, many nations in Europe began sailing around the world in search of treasure and new trading routes. Early exploration into Alaska began in 1725 with a Russian expedition led by Danish explorer Vitus Bering. This voyage was commissioned by the Emperor of Russia Peter the Great, who wanted to establish if Asia and North America shared any land borders. During the expedition, Bering set sail from the Kamchatka Peninsula and navigated north along Russia's east coast until he finally passed through a narrow passage and reached the Arctic Ocean. This pathway separated Asia from North America and now bears his name. Vitus Bering concluded that North America was not joined to Asia, but before he could explore the area any further, bad weather forced him to return to Russia. On his arrival at St. Petersburg, Vitus Bering was heavily criticized for not having actually seen the American coast, so he immediately proposed a second and more detailed exploration of the same region. Bering and his crew sailed east from Kamchatka toward North America and made it all the way to the southern coast of Alaska, where he landed on Kayak Island to further investigate the discovery. On July 16, 1741, Vitus Bering became the first European to discover modern-day Alaska. On his return to Russia, Bering sailed by and discovered many of the Aleutian Islands. But before he could reach the Kamchatka Peninsula, his ship got wrecked on a small island which was later named after him. Vitus Bering and several of his men died of scurvy and were buried there. However, the survivors of the wreck built a small boat out of the wreckage and sailed back to Russia in 1742. Vitus Bering and his crew members discovered great wealth in Alaska in the form of sea otter pelts, which were judged to be the finest and most expensive fur in the world. After his crew returned to Russia with the animal furs, small associations of traders began to sail from the shores of Siberia toward the Alaskan islands in search for the valuable sea otter fur. The most prominent of these trading companies was the Russian-American Company, which held possession of many parts of southern Alaska and began trading with the indigenous people. The first European settlement was eventually established on Kodiak Island in 1784. Over the next several years, the British, Spain, France, and the United States all made attempts at exploring Alaska, but the Russians continued to be the most dominant European presence in the region. In the mid-1800s, the Russians wanted to expand their influence over the Middle East at the expense of a declining Ottoman Empire, which ruled a large portion of the region for more than 600 years. The British and French saw the Russians' power grab as a danger to their trade routes and were determined to stop it. Consequently, the Crimean War broke out in 1854. The war was fought mainly on the Crimean Peninsula between the Russians and an alliance of Britain, France, Turkey, and Sardinia. It lasted for 2 years until it was formally brought to an end in 1856 with the signing of a treaty in Paris which would crush any dreams of an expansion of the Russian Empire. Back in Alaska, overhunting had depleted the supply of animal furs and nearly led to the eradication of all the sea otters in the region. Furthermore, defeat in the Crimean War depleted Russian resources and left the country in a lot of debt. The Russians also realized it would be difficult to supply and defend bases such a long way off from the mainland in a case where Alaska got invaded. As a consequence, the Russians started to lose interest in Alaska and began to seriously question if they could continue their reign in North America. Since Russia had been at war with Britain for most of the preceding 2 decades, any business between them involving the sale of Alaska was very unlikely to occur. The United States, on the other hand, had good relations with Russia in the 19th century. So in 1859, the Russians approached the United States with offers to sell them Alaska. The U.S., which had been expanding across the continent, showed interest in buying the territory. Russia and the United States began the negotiations. However, the talks were cut short by the outbreak of the American Civil War, which began in 1861. Senator William Seward, a man who served as Secretary of State during both the Lincoln and Johnson administrations, believed Alaska's greatest value lied in its ability to form a trade link between North America and Asia. So within months of the Civil War's end, he resurfaced the idea to buy Alaska from Russia with Eduard de Stokel, the Russian minister to the United States. Secret negotiations between the two representatives began in March 1867, and the Treaty of Cession was signed within the same month, stipulating that the United States would purchase Alaska for $7.2 million in gold, a bargain of less than 2 cents an acre. Alaska was formally passed to the United States on the 18th of October 1867, a day now celebrated as Alaska Day. At the time of the purchase, Senator William Seward was heavily criticized by many who were convinced the land had nothing to offer. But this was about to change in 1896, when large deposits of gold were discovered in what is now called Dawson City, near the boundary between Canada and Alaska. Within the next 3 years, around 100,000 prospectors had traveled to Alaska to mine for gold. The mining and mineral production industries flourished as a result of the gold rush, and in 1912, Congress passed the Second Organic Act, which established Alaska as an organized territory of the United States. In 1942, during World War II, 3 of the Aleutian Islands were invaded by the Japanese. The U.S. government feared that Japan's occupation of the islands would be the first step toward an attack on the Pacific Northwest, so they retook them after fierce fighting at the price of many American and Japanese lives. During the war, the U.S. began the construction of the Alaskan Highway, which spans almost 1,400 miles from Dawson Creek in Canada to the city of Fairbanks in Alaska. The highway connected Alaska to the lower 48 states for the first time, and served the purpose to supply military outposts in the region. Seeing that Alaska had become strategically important to the military during World War II, in addition to the discovery of oil and other mineral resources in the territory, Alaska was officially admitted to the Union as the 49th U.S. state on January 3, 1959. Well, that's all we have for you today. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you would like to see more videos like this one, hit the subscribe button and turn on that notification bell so you know whenever we upload a new video. Goodbye and thanks for watching.